I have no mouth and I must scream is one of the bleakest pieces of media I've ever encountered. The audiobook is about 40 minutes long, so I suggest you give it a listen or a read, as I'll be spoiling it here. Good? Well, the basic story of the book is that an AI named Am has kept the last 5 people on Earth alive for over a century to torture them endlessly. All 5 of them are desperately looking for ways to kill themselves, be it starving themselves or sprinting into a wall as fast as they can. After Am sends them on a months-long journey to find a can of food, only to show them that they have no way of opening the can, a fight breaks out, and 3 of them die before our narrator, Ted, kills the 4th. As punishment, Am turns him into a smooth blob of flesh with no mouth, and keeps him alive and alone for hundreds of years more. I will describe myself as I see myself. I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded, with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface, as though light is being beamed from within. So yeah, it's pretty damn bleak. Well, how do you translate something so incredibly overbearing into a game? Games operate on one core principle to keep people engaged, balancing empowerment and disempowerment. You need to manufacture a sense of adversity and a sense of triumph to make the game fun for more than a few minutes. So making a game based around being toyed with by a godlike AI for decades before and after the game's events is a pretty tricky thing to do. You may occasionally get a sense of triumph over the gameplay, but that's vastly overshadowed by the redundancy of everything you're doing by narrative. You'll feel a great sense of victory for solving a puzzle, but the puzzle was to simply cover your eyes with a bandana so you can safely navigate past the color yellow. Also, the Dam's horror show can go on, and he can laugh at you as you reach the next puzzle. While I'm sad to report that you'll probably need a walkthrough to get any of the endings in this game, it does a fantastic job taking advantage of the confusing logic in adventure games to deliver some of the most sickening moments I've ever had in a game. It's not that the puzzles are completely illogical, all of the solutions make sense, but there are often arbitrary and unclear restrictions on whether you can and cannot do certain actions, sometimes due to bugs, and so it's easy to get soft-locked. Many of the puzzles revolve around your character's psychological limitations, such as one point when I had to get a claustrophobic character to lock herself into a sarcophagus to progress. After doing so, the sarcophagus leads into a locked elevator with buttons labeled after dates on your character's mortal lifespan. I'll just let the latter half of this encounter play out. I don't normally do this, but I feel like I should put a trigger warning here for sexual abuse. You can skip to this time code if you don't want to see this.
You had to make a living. You applied at Inksci Engineering. Your credentials were still good, and you made a good impression, and the woman who hired you also lost a child. Your hopes were reawakened. You left your office after working late at the Inksci corporate headquarters building. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor for a maintenance man. To your horror, he inserted his key into the control panel and locked the elevator.
I'm back, Ellen.
Oh, sweet Jesus! It's him!
You thought you had blocked me out of your memory forever, except for those inconvenient attacks of hysteria every now and then. But I've returned for you.
The yellow!
Ah, yes. My calling card. Always the yellow jacket, the yellow boots. My maintenance man disguise gave me access to office buildings all over Manhattan, not just yours.
The box!
So you do remember me getting onto the elevator that night. Do you also remember the blood? The screams? How many hours was it?
No, it's not possible!
Poor Ellen. Too proud of your accomplishments to admit you could be so overpowered by a slime ball like me. You couldn't even bring yourself to testify at my trial with the 20 other women.
How?
Am gave me the chance to be with you forever. I waited in the sarcophagus until you arrived. What's a mere 100 years of waiting compared to an eternity of torturing you?
Please, not again!
Yes, again. And again, and again, and again. I've waited so long for the taste of you again. But in my tomb I've grown stronger. Now you will remember more than the color of my clothing.
This might be the only time a game, or really any work of art, has left me disgusted, feeling like I was going to be sick. I had a look on my face like your mother might have if you showed her The Thing. Sure, the dialogue and literal events of this scene are disturbing, but that effect was multiplied by the fact that I, as a player, had to work to get my character into that situation. For the first time in my memory, after beating a challenge in a game, there wasn't one part of my mind that was thinking, phew, I figured it out. Every part of me was disgusted. Such simple ludology, but used so effectively that this instantly became one of my favorite moments in gaming. While that was definitely the hardest hitting moment in the game for me, the game was packed with other downright sickening scenarios. Being asked to perform needless experimental surgery on an 8-year-old boy in a concentration camp with Dr. Mengele at your side, having to tie up your mother-in-law in a harness so that her torture can power a machine, being forced to torture animals to progress, feeding your own heart to a jackal, remembering that you turned your own parents into the Nazis. This game feels you leaving disgusted with every second of the way. No amount of satisfaction from solving puzzles can compete with the horrible things you have to witness in this game. And the slight presence of a branching narrative adds this painful sensation that you could have done things differently to every awful thing you have to do to progress. I'm pretty desensitized to horrible imagery, as many people in my generation are, but I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream starts to seriously affect my mood if I play it for too long. Violence in art isn't about visual detail, or graphics in the case of games. It's all about context, so even with relatively simple visuals from 1995, this game pulls chords at the root of my psyche in a way that not even the book was able to. This is one of the earliest cases that I'm aware of in which the mainstream games media was referring to games as art. And while they were always art to some degree, this was a major leap away from the idea that games are toys, and that violent imagery in games is just to make them more fun or exciting. A G.I. Joe doll, but this time with a gun. Nothing's more aggravating to me than people claiming that games aren't art, or can never be art. If there's a single purpose to this channel, it's to disprove that notion. It's right there in the channel description. And so I'm thankful to games like I Have No Mouth for advancing that cause so early into gaming's maturation. Gaming is, in my opinion, the most interesting art form ever conceived, in that it can use the tools of every other artistic medium, and work its own unique tool, ludology, into the mix as well. While I Have No Mouth is far from a ludic masterpiece, it does some very interesting things with its ludology, and it's absolutely an important stepping stone in that direction, simply because watching it doesn't have nearly the emotional impact that playing it does. Just like you have to press on and turn the pages in a book in spite of what you might find, you have to press on in this game knowing that you won't find anything but more horror. Every awful thing you see was something that you chose to see, either because you're the one who solved the puzzles, or because you didn't choose to simply stop playing. Let's look more closely at the story as a whole. This is going to get complicated. As is revealed after all 5 stories, the reason we were able to surprise Am over and over and go against his expectations was that there were 2 other AIs involved, secretly sabotaging his purgatories. And as he goes into his mind to analyze what he thinks is his mistake, we're able to be turned into viruses to attempt to end our tortures. The ending is where the scope suddenly increases 100-fold. I've got to be forward with you, the ending isn't completely straight in my head, nor is it the most interesting part of the story, so rather than definite facts, I only have an interpretation. As I see it, Am's psyche was controlled by 3 main components, his id, his ego, and his superego. When the 2 AIs who interfered with Am's purgatories finally speak with Murdoch, they tell him about 750 humans in cryosleep on the moon. The components of Am's psyche want to work with the other AIs to recover the humans for more torture, so that Am's ever-hungry id will be closer to sating its lust. So we can invoke the action of entropy, which was created by the 2 other AIs when they helped Ellen to defy Am's expectations in the pyramid. Doing so destroys the 2 AIs who freed us from Am, but also nullifies Am's psyche components, so that we can safely upload Murdoch's mind to Am, and terraform the Earth for the humans to return without being tortured. I think that's what happened. I'm usually pretty good at this stuff, but you can see why this threw me for a loop. But as I said, this isn't the most interesting part of the story. The most interesting part is driven by the metaphor machine that we find inside of Am's brainscape, a device that was made to manifest the psyches of its victims into psychodramas, or as I've called them thus far, Am's purgatories.
This cyberspace template mixes subject history with cyber reality constructs. The result is often an allegorical experience, and one full of deeper meanings.
Worlds that people can inhabit, that were created to torture them after analyzing their psyches. The 5 stories that take place through the bulk of this game. So now let's focus on the psychodramas, our 5 characters' tailor-made purgatories, starting with Gorrister's. It's worth noting that, as with Murdoch's ending, I'll only be covering the stories as I saw them. There are multiple endings, so there may be more to read into these stories. From what we can infer in-game, Gorrister was a trucker whose wife went insane and was sent to a home before her death. Her mother was the one responsible, and she covered her guilt by convincing herself that it was Gorrister's fault for being on the road so much. Eventually, she was so convinced of her delusion that she and her husband, Harry, attempted to murder Gorrister. Am's personal punishment for Gorrister was to send him back to the murder site and to see how he handled confronting both his wife and his murderers. In my playthrough, I tied up the mother-in-law to power the blimp. However, since I didn't bury the wife's body, the jackal, who acted as a sort of heckling conscience, or a sage, to Gorrister, never gave me his heart back, and so I wasn't able to properly steer the blimp with the navigation system that was built into the heart. In the end, my only choice was to crash the blimp into the honky-tonk that housed all the family members, the wife and the in-laws. Gorrister wasn't able to bury his past, so he resolved to destroy it all, with himself. Am seemed almost pleased with this. Things hadn't gone according to his plan, but I think I gave him a good show. My Gorrister would have rather wiped the slate clean than come to terms with his past. Gorrister attempted suicide multiple times over his guilt of his wife's insanity, and finally, the suicide that stuck was the one that took all of his old ghosts with him. Of course, that's only speaking relatively. Am, as always, pulled Gorrister back to his torture chamber before he died. Ellen's is easily the story that hit me the hardest, and that's in no small part due to her fleshy backstory. She was a social outcast, overproud of her academic achievements to the point of alienating peers. The game makes a point noting that she's never smoked pot and has only had sex twice in her life. After her miscarriage, she shut down emotionally until her husband left her, and she decided to get a job at Inksci Engineering where, after one late shift, she found herself locked in an elevator with the only other person in the building. A repairman in a yellow suit. If you ignored my warning earlier, then you know what happened next. Otherwise, you can infer it. Perhaps it was her pride in her accomplishments that made Am hate her. After all, it's her pride that drove her to ignoring the traumas of her past. And it's that unresolved trauma that Am exploits, keeping her locked inside of a yellow box, doing God knows what else to her. Her pride was so powerful that, rather than seeking help, she feels ashamed when she has one of her now frequent panic attacks.
Another panic attack. I feel so ashamed.
Her pride was her weakness, and Am uses that weakness to torture her in one of the most brutal ways imaginable, to the point where she has to wear a blindfold to interact with anything that's the color yellow. Ellen's story, as I see it, was supposed to end in that elevator, Am trapping her with the repairman for God knows how long. But thanks to the other AI's interference, she was able to carry on. I can think of no other work that handles such heavy subject matter in such an elegant and ghastly way, presenting the trauma and its effects full frontal for us to see, but without undermining it whatsoever. Watching this scene, I almost feel like I'm trapped in the yellow box myself. No matter which direction I face, the trauma is staring right at me, and all I can do is stare right back into that yellow and wish it would stop. This was almost the 3rd time a game's made me cry. I absolutely got a bit choked up. This scene is going to stick with me for years to come. But let's quickly move on to relatively lighter subject matter. Benny is perhaps Am's least favorite human and favorite plaything. As a merciless commander who only cared about advancing in rank, he represents exactly the sort of attitude that drove America to inadvertently giving Am, a war machine, sentience. As a soldier, obviously his physical prowess was one of his greatest assets, so Am quickly took that away before the story's events, crippling his legs and transforming him into an ape-like thing using the technology that Murdoch helped develop, even going so far as to give him an infantile intellect. In his mortal life, Benny would carelessly frag any of his squad that he saw as a liability or weak link.
You did this to me! You murdered me because I didn't measure up to your standards. Then you killed the witnesses.
So cleverly, Am's psychodrama for Benny involves depriving him of food, setting his intellect back to that of an adult, and letting him loose amongst a tribe of primitive humans. If Benny wants to have any chance at regaining his strength, or, metaphorically speaking, advancing his rank, he's going to need two things: food and rest. Unfortunately, in this scenario, those two things are mutually exclusive. Benny coughs up blood whenever he tries to eat the local fruit, and the only way to actually eat any is to have a starving mother chew it up for him and regurgitate it back into his mouth. However, as soon as Benny goes to sleep, he wakes up the next day to find that the mother is going to be sacrificed as a way of staying Am's wrath on the tribe. When she's killed, it's revealed that her, and almost definitely every other human you encounter in the game, are all robots fabricated by Am. While you can complete this story solely by focusing on food and then ditching the boy and his mother once the mother can no longer feed you, the talking headstones of the former comrades that Benny executed on the battlefield urge you to prove that Benny can be compassionate in spite of his past. So I opted to steal the bag used for the sacrifice lottery and hide the boy so that he wouldn't be picked. However, the tribe found him in time for the next sacrifice, and I chose for Benny to offer himself in the boy's place. Again, this isn't what Am expected. Benny, like Gorster and Murdoch and Ellen and Ted, wasn't supposed to be able to redeem himself. He was supposed to wallow in his mistakes. Murdoch was a Nazi scientist, working next to Dr. Mengele, doing countless cruel and aimless experiments on the Jews, mutilating them and destroying their spirit, whether man, woman, or child. He turned his parents in to the Nazis and became one himself. My version of the story was spent trying to atone for Murdoch's horrible treatment of the Jews, starting with murdering a fellow scientist, before helping the Jews escape and overrun the concentration camp. Fittingly, they attempt to murder Murdoch if you help them end his research, but of course, Am brings Murdoch back to his torture chamber before he's dead. Am saw himself in Murdoch, and so his mission for him was to continue with his research, seeing as a lot of it went into Am's current torture methods. He's being punished for discontinuing his research due to failing memory. If you choose to help the Jews, Am simply says,
Since you now identify with your victims, I suppose it's only right that I let you experience their tortures too.
Cleverly, if you play from left to right, the last character is a paranoid schizophrenic, and the player will feel much the same way this late into the game, suspecting a plot from Am around every corner. Ted constantly remarks on seeing patterns where none may exist, with eyes in the bushes and symbolic imagery that leads nowhere. Ted is characterized as being charismatic, having good looks, social connections, and living a totally posh life, with his only weakness being his schizophrenic paranoia, which of course Am exploits. When you first start a story, an eagle flies by and drops an arrow pointing you to your destination. Right off the bat, we have empty symbolism, relating back to the paranoia that causes Ted to see patterns and meaning where none exists. What does the eagle mean, we might be asking ourselves? And we've sown an aimless distrust in Am's intentions for Ted during this story. Had the eagle not flown by and dropped that arrow, I would have gone straight into the dark room, but since it did, my first instinct was to turn around and try to go the other way, which I couldn't. This is honestly brilliant. We've spent 5 seconds in control of the character, and with one little animation of a bird flying by and dropping an arrow, we're already feeling paranoid and trying to decipher patterns in totally random events. Once you press forward into the dark room, you have to choose between 5 computer monitors, all of which show a different location, and picking any of them except for one fails the psychodrama and resets it. With practically no hints as to which is the correct one, again, the paranoia grows stronger. There's no reason that we shouldn't just start outside of the castle, the correct scene, other than to instantly introduce us to how it feels to be as paranoid as Ted is. Once we're in the castle scene where we belong, we immediately see eyes peering at us from the shadows, again building on that powerful paranoid feeling. Inside the castle, we learn that Ted is now in love with Ellen, and while this is clearly another one of Am's robots, Ellen asks Ted to assist in her suicide. My Ted complied with that request before Am started showing us images of witchcraft, a heaven and a hell, and showed us the devil, another of Am's robots, in order to convince us that Am had taken over hell. For the last humans on Earth, as far as Ted was concerned, the death they sought so desperately only led to more time with Am. It's also implied that the castle we're in is supposed to be owned by Ted, seeing as the master bedroom is full of books that Ted's already read. Of course, this is probably more work of the metaphor machine. Ted might have been rich, but I'm sure he didn't own a castle. But in this psychodrama, he has all that he could want in the world: a vast home, tons of books, and a maid who wants to sleep with him. However, due to his paranoia of Am's schemes, he isn't even capable of enjoying sex. Having sex with the maid is the most immediately obvious way of finding the mirror to help in Ellen's suicide, but to do so only results in Ted feeling like he's betrayed Ellen, more strife between you and the maid, and ultimately leads to Ellen being sent to hell. He's so paranoid that his psychodrama won't even allow for him to have sex to save his loved one from hell. For very good reasons, he doesn't trust anything he sees in his new life with Am, and the game does an incredible job getting that feeling across during his story. If you play your cards right and stay faithful to Ted's love for Ellen, you can save her, and her soul will go to heaven when you help her to die. Of course, this isn't the real Ellen, it's another of Am's robots, but that's not the point. In all 5 psychodramas, the humans were supposed to wallow in the mistakes of their past, and be laughed at by Am for their petty human greed, pride, and misjudgments. However, thanks to the interference of the other 2 AIs, the humans have the opportunity to redeem themselves to some degree, or at least give a well-heard apology for their actions. This is why Am thinks he's miscalculated, and opens himself up for the virus to disable his id, his ego, and his superego. I generally have a problem with adaptive works, especially games, because they're telling a story that wasn't originally designed for the medium it's being told in. With my adaptive games, I much prefer the story to go in a completely different direction, and I Have No Mouth certainly did that in a satisfying way. I mean, this game takes place 10 years before the book, and yet you can kill off as many of the characters as you want, you can make them come to terms with their troubled past, and you can nullify Am and start reseeding the Earth. Sure, the game might not be canon, but who cares about that? It's a fantastic story nonetheless. It's more like an adaptation of the book into a branching narrative, rather than a straight prequel. As good as the book is, and as buggy as the game is, it absolutely deserves to wear the title. Games can have an incredibly tricky time dealing with serious, heavy, and depressing subject matter. As George from Super Bunny Hop put it, these things look like some sort of cartoon. That naturally gives games a sort of hurdle that they have to pass using good direction and writing if they want to have the same impact as a book or a film with similar tone and subject matter. I'm happy to report that, for all its gameplay issues, I Have No Mouth absolutely passes that hurdle by leaps and bounds. Daring games like Planescape Torment, MGS2, Dark Souls, or indeed I Have No Mouth, are the ones that stick with me the most. Games that break the stigmas of being thoughtless power fantasies and focus on disempowerment and negative emotions. Even as early as 1995, games like this were being made that wanted to be seen as serious art above everything else. I was only able to force myself to universal hint system through this game for the first time in the past few days, but I can guarantee that the experience is going to stick with me for years to come. Dark Souls has made me stressed and adrenaline pumped while feeling somber. Soma has made me existential, questioning my beliefs. Resident Evil has put me on the edge of my seat for hours. But only I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream has put me face to face with the weaknesses of man, and shown me just how low we can steep once we've been broken.